The last 48 hours may have changed the balance of power in the Middle East permanently. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut down, oil supply is collapsing, and for the first time in decades, multiple fronts of war are active at once, from Tehran to Lebanon, from Iraq to the Gulf. This is no longer a contained conflict. This is a system-level shock, one that could reshape global energy, destabilize economies, and pull major powers into direct confrontation. So what exactly happened in the last 48 hours? And why does it matter far beyond the Middle East? On Monday, March 16th, Israel launched a new wave of attacks on Tehran as the US-Israel war on Iran entered its 17th day. Simultaneously, across the Persian Gulf, authorities suspended flights at Dubai International Airport after a drone-related incident sparked a fire near the facility. Al Jazeera Qatar's Ministry of Defense reported successfully intercepting a second wave of Iranian missile attacks. Following an initial salvo earlier in the day, Saudi Arabia confirmed intercepting a wave of 35 Iranian drones launched at its eastern region, the heartland of its oil infrastructure. CBS News: a tanker was struck while at anchor approximately 23 nautical miles east of the UAE's Fujairah in the Gulf of Oman. Drone attacks caused fires at the UAE's Shah gas field and the Fujairah oil industry zone, two of the country's most critical energy installations. CNBC: meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israel launched simultaneous strikes on Tehran and Beirut, targeting Iranian military sites and Hezbollah infrastructure. Iran chose its retaliatory targets carefully, among them the U.S. Embassy compound in Saudi Arabia. 6 U.S. service members had been killed in action, with an additional 18 seriously wounded. And this is not a limited strike. This is a regional war. To understand the last 48 hours, you must understand the last 48 days. The confrontation took place after years of rising tension over Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missiles, and its military reach across the Middle East. Attempts to renegotiate a nuclear deal in 2025 and 2026 were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Iran's posture was in a weakened state after years of sanctions, destabilizing protests, damage inflicted during a 12-day war with Israel in June 2025, and the diminished position of Iran's allies during the Israel-Hamas war. Encyclopedia Britannica on February 20th. President Trump gave Iran a 10-day deadline to reach a nuclear deal or face military action. On February 25th, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that a historic agreement was within reach, ahead of renewed talks in Geneva. Wikipedia: the words "it turned out" meant nothing. On February 27th, the day before the strikes began, multiple embassies were evacuated from Tehran. According to the White House, Iran had rejected a proposal for a civilian nuclear program with American investment in exchange for dismantling its enrichment capabilities. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated series of strikes targeting key officials, military commanders, and nuclear facilities. Wikipedia: Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, Defense Minister Aziz Nasrallah, and IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour were killed in the opening strikes. Wikipedia: a nation of 90 million people woke up without its head of state. The threshold had been crossed. There would be no returning from it. Speaking at the Pentagon, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane emphasized this was not a single, overnight operation and that more losses should be expected. President Trump predicted the war could last for weeks, the clearest public signal yet of its projected scope. CNN: 2 weeks into what the Pentagon has branded Operation Epic Fury, the United States-Israeli campaign has evolved from initial strikes that killed the supreme leader and dozens of senior military figures into sustained large-scale air operations across Iran. Strikes have been recorded in at least 26 of Iran's 31 provinces, with Tehran the most heavily targeted. Al Jazeera's posture, against all expectations, has remained combative. IRGC spokesman Brigadier General Ali Mohammad Naini told Iranian broadcasters that most of the IRGC's weapons cache remains intact, adding that the missiles used in the ongoing war are from a decade ago and that Iran has not yet deployed the munitions produced since the 2025 12-day war with Israel. Al Jazeera: in Iraq, between late January and early March, the US-Israeli coalition carried out limited airstrikes targeting key sites belonging to Iran-backed brigades of the Popular Mobilization Forces. During the opening days of the war, the Islamic resistance in Iraq claimed 67 drone and missile attacks on targets in Iraq and the region, many of which were intercepted. Hezbollah, observing a fragile ceasefire since 2024, re-entered the conflict. After the opening strikes on Iran, Israeli forces conducted airstrikes on Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon. On March 2nd, Hezbollah launched missiles and drones into Israel, prompting an escalation in Israeli airstrikes that reached into southern Beirut. A drone believed to have been launched by Hezbollah struck Britain's RAF base at Akrotiri, Cyprus. Encyclopedia Britannica: the theater of war now stretches from Tehran to the Mediterranean. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide. Through that sliver of water bordered by Iran, Oman, and the UAE passes approximately 1/5 of the world's oil supply and nearly 1/5 of its liquefied natural gas. For 3 weeks, it has been effectively closed. According to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Centre, no more than 5 ships have passed through the strait each day since the start of the war, compared with a historical average of 138 daily transits. At least 16 commercial vessels have been attacked in the region since February 28. Al Jazeera tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has plunged to a near halt. Iran's retaliation has involved the targeting of energy infrastructure across the Gulf, interrupting production and prompting closures as a precautionary measure. Oil producers in the region, including Saudi Arabia, are reducing output as storage fills up in onshore tanks and at-sea vessels. Bloomberg: the war has triggered what the International Energy Agency is calling the largest oil supply disruption in history. Global oil supplies are expected to plunge by 8 million barrels per day this month alone. CNBC International benchmark Brent crude has surged more than 50% over the past month, reaching its highest levels since 2022, and briefly topped $106 a barrel. Some energy analysts are warning of $200 per barrel if the disruption persists. CNBC: there is an almost unbearable irony in the Strait of Hormuz becoming Iran's primary weapon. About 90% of Iran's own oil exports pass through Karg Island and then the strait. China, Tehran's largest remaining economic partner, cannot receive Iranian crude while the strait remains shut. Every day the blockade continues. Iran severs its own economic lifeline and alienates the one major power that has consistently shielded it at the United Nations. Al Jazeera: the blockade continues. When a war of this magnitude erupts, the world does not watch in silence. Every major power has been forced to choose a lane, and those choices are reshaping the global order. China condemned the killing of Iran's supreme leader as a grave violation of Iran's sovereignty and security, calling it a trampling of the UN Charter's basic principles, and urged an immediate stop to military operations. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China Russia provided intelligence support to Iran, including data on US military positions. China focused on diplomatic mediation and limited material assistance. Analysts describe these contributions as enabling Iran to sustain its defenses without escalating to a broader confrontation involving Moscow or Beijing. Wikipedia: the UN Security Council, Russia and China pushed their own draft resolution, one that the United States blocked. China's representative declared, "This is a war that should not have happened, and a war that benefits no one." United Nations: Europe has been more divided than united. France's Emmanuel Macron said France cannot approve of strikes conducted outside of international law, while simultaneously stating that Iran bears primary responsibility in announcing movement of French materiel into the Mediterranean. A joint statement by Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz condemned Iranian counterstrikes on regional neighbors. Wikipedia: NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte told the BBC that Europe is supportive of the US attacks, calling Iran a long-term threat to stability, and expressed confidence that the US knows what it is doing. Wikipedia: the Gulf monarchies Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE find themselves in an excruciating position. American allies hosting American forces that Iran is now actively targeting on their soil. Qatar's energy minister warned that if the war continues, Gulf producers may be forced to halt exports and declare force majeure, adding this will bring down economies of the world. Wikipedia: Trump called on China, Japan, France, and the UK by name to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz with naval escorts. Japan and Australia both said they had no plans to send ships. NATO offered no formal commitment. Trump warned that the alliance faces a very bad future if his proposal receives a negative response. Al Jazeera: the United States, in this moment, is fighting largely alone. The question that analysts in every capital are now asking is not whether this war has spread. It already has. The question is whether it can be contained at all, despite more than 2 weeks of relentless airstrikes. US intelligence assessments indicate Iran's regime will likely remain in place, for now weakened but more hardline, with the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps exerting greater control. The Washington Post: this is the paradox of the strategy. Military strikes intended to weaken Iran's government have instead accelerated the IRGC's consolidation of domestic power. A nuclear-armed ideological security state is not less dangerous when it is wounded. It is more unpredictable. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, in a CBS interview, dismissed Trump's claim that Tehran was seeking a truce. "No, we never ask for a ceasefire, and we have never asked even for negotiation. We are ready to defend ourselves as long as it takes." Al Jazeera: Lebanon is re-entering active war. Iraq sits at the edge. Yemen's Houthis hover over the Red Sea with a choice to make. Iran's targeting of military camps and headquarters of Iranian Kurdish opposition groups in northern Iraq underscores its persistent concern over internal unrest and cross-border insurgent mobilization. ACLID: the architecture of deterrence that held the Middle East back from total war for decades is not merely strained. It has been dismantled. The war's economic consequences are no longer theoretical. They are appearing at gas pumps, grocery shelves, and factory floors. In countries that have no soldiers in the fight, that global oil supplies are experiencing their worst disruption in decades, driven by the sharp decrease in tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and attacks on critical oil infrastructure by both sides. Energy analysts warn that until a meaningful resumption of oil flows occurs, upward pressure on fuel prices will persist. But crude oil is only the beginning. The Strait of Hormuz has locked up access to goods far beyond petroleum. About 35% of the world's urea and more than 20% of global fertilizers pass through the strait, threatening food prices ahead of the growing season. More than a quarter of the world's helium critical for semiconductor manufacturing comes from Qatar and transits through the choke. Aluminum prices have surged to a 4-year high, with roughly 20% of the world's raw aluminum supply originating in the Middle East. The UN World Food Programme has warned that the 2026 military escalation in Iran is driving significant long-term increases in global food prices. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell over 400 points, approximately 1% in a single session. Wikipedia Russia notably benefit. Higher energy prices fill Moscow's war chest at precisely the moment Ukraine needs Western attention. Warsaw has noted this explicitly. The war in Iran and the war in Ukraine are now economically entangled. History rarely announces its turning points in advance, but 3 plausible paths now emerge from the wreckage of the past 17 days. Scenario 1. Negotiated Pozion's economy, already under siege from sanctions and war, cannot sustain indefinite conflict. Its oil lifeline is severed. China, Tehran's most important remaining economic partner, is quietly applying pressure to both sides. Oman's foreign minister, the man who mediated the February talks, has said that active negotiations were well underway before the strikes, that a deal had been close. Wikipedia: if a new supreme leader is installed and back-channel communication resumes through Muscat, a limited ceasefire arrangement is achievable within weeks. The strait reopens, oil falls, the crisis is managed but not resolved. Scenario 2. Prolonged attrition. The IRGC claims that the missiles used so far are from a decade ago, and that Iran has not yet deployed its most modern munitions. Al Jazeera: if Iran continues absorbing strikes while steadily degrading Gulf energy infrastructure targeting the UAE's pipelines, Qatar's LNG terminals, and Saudi Arabia's eastern province, the economic cost to the West becomes politically unsustainable. The war settles into a grinding attrition that no one formally ends. Oil stays above $100 for a year. The global economy contracts. Scenario 3. Escalation beyond Iran. This is the scenario most analysts fear and none want to name. If Hezbollah fully re-enters the conflict, if Iraq's militias open a sustained front against U.S. forces, if the Houthis resume Red Sea attacks, the war ceases to be about Iran and becomes about the architecture of American power in the entire Middle East. Iran's regional escalation network, though degraded, has not been dismantled. Al Jazeera: 1 miscalculation. A U.S. ship sunk. A Gulf capital struck with a ballistic missile could force responses that none of the current principals have publicly prepared for. There is a temptation, in moments like this, to search for clarity, to identify a victor, a villain, a definitive turning point. History rarely provides such comfort. What is clear is this: the United States and Israel entered this conflict having calculated that Iran's weakness was their window. Given Iran's diminished position, years of sanctions, internal protests, a degraded proxy network, both governments assessed they had greater opportunity to advance their objectives through military means than through diplomacy. Encyclopedia Britannica: that calculation may yet prove correct in the long arc of history, but its immediate cost has been borne not by governments but by people. As of Sunday, at least 1,444 people had been killed inside Iran, with more than 18,000 injured. Al Jazeera: Gulf cities that have spent 20 years building themselves into global crossroads for commerce and aviation now find themselves intercepting missiles at dawn. The world's most vital commercial waterway has been reduced to 5 transits a day. U.S. intelligence now assesses that despite the sustained campaign, Iran's regime will likely remain in place, weakened, but more hardline, with the IRGC exerting greater control. The Washington Post: if that assessment holds, the central premise of the operation, that military force could catalyze regime change or nuclear surrender, must be honestly examined. The Omani foreign minister, who spent months building the framework for a diplomatic resolution, said after the strikes began that the negotiations had been making real progress, that those talks collapsed not because Iran was unwilling to make concessions, but because the window for diplomacy was closed before it could be fully opened. Is a historical fact that will outlast whatever military outcome eventually emerges from this conflict. The next 48 hours will not end this war. They will, however, tell us something essential about whether anyone has the will to prevent it from becoming something far worse than what we have already witnessed. The strait is closed, the missiles are still flying, and the world is watching not to see who wins, but to see whether anyone remembers what peace was worth. This script is grounded and verified. Reporting from March 16th to 17th. 2026, and draws on sources including Al Jazeera, CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, NPR, The Washington Post, Eicheled, Britannica, and the UK House of Commons Library. All casualty figures and military claims are subject to ongoing verification in an active conflict environment. Strategic analysis helps us understand escalation, but understanding conflict does not mean wishing for it. History repeatedly shows that war, in any form, carries costs that extend far beyond military objectives. Economic disruption, political instability, and human suffering rarely remain confined to battlefields. Whatever the strategic calculations, the hope remains the same, that tensions are contained before they harden into open conflict, and that decisions made in the first hours prevent consequences that could last for decades, because in the end, no doctrine, no missile system, and no alliance structure can erase the long-term cost of war.